On the morning of April 2nd, 2024, a young man out walking with a friend along the Wisconsin shoreline of Lake Michigan came across something that stopped him completely. The area was called Warnimont Park, a rocky, wooded stretch of coastline not far from Milwaukee that most people passed without ever really thinking about. It was not a popular spot, not somewhere crowds gathered, which is part of why what was found there landed so hard. Roughly 30 feet up the bluff, resting in a place where nothing like it had any business being, was a human leg. There was no explanation for how it got there by accident. That much was immediately clear. And for the detective who arrived at the scene that morning, the moment she saw it, something shifted inside her that wouldn't shift back. She had a homicide. She had no weapon. She had no suspect. She had no name for the woman that leg once belonged to. She had almost nothing. And somewhere in that nothing, a 19-year-old girl named Sade Robinson was waiting to be found. Sade Robinson had built her life carefully and deliberately, the way people do when they understand from early on that nothing comes without effort. She was 19 years old, a full-time student at a local technical college in Milwaukee, working 2 jobs while pursuing an associate's degree in criminal justice. She worked as a server at a country club, showed up on time, smiled at everyone, and was described by the people around her as one of the best workers they had ever seen. She also worked at a restaurant called Pizza Shuttle, where the owner remembered her specifically, the way she greeted him every single time with the same small joke, the kind of routine that only stands out once you realize you'll never hear it again. She had rented her own apartment. She had bought her own car. She was months away from graduating and had been meeting with Air Force recruiters because graduating wasn't enough. The plan was to keep going. Her younger sister, Adriana, 16 years old at the time, looked up to Sade the way younger siblings do when the person ahead of them is doing everything right. On Easter Sunday, March 31st, 2024, the two of them worked together at the country club that morning, then went to their grandparents' house for Easter dinner that evening. It was a good night. When Sade dropped Adriana off at the end of it, there was a pause before they said goodbye. Adriana would remember that pause later, a different kind of hesitation than usual, one of those moments that only takes on meaning after the fact. The next morning, Sade FaceTimed her mother, Sheena Scarborough. She was glowing, Sheena said. Beautiful, full of energy. She didn't mention anything about plans for that evening, and nothing in her voice or her face suggested anything was wrong. The security cameras in Sade's building captured her leaving at 9 in the morning for her shift at Pizza Shuttle. She left work at 5 in the afternoon. And then Sade Robinson sent a text to a man she had recently met, a man named Maxwell Anderson, to figure out where they were going to meet for their first date. Sade and Maxwell Anderson had met 3 days earlier when Sade walked into a bar looking for a job. Maxwell was the bartender. He was 33 years old, 6 feet 1 inch tall, and had worked in the service industry for a long time. He had briefly served in the Navy before receiving a general discharge. He owned a home on the south side of Milwaukee. On the surface, there was nothing immediately alarming about the encounter. He walked Sade to her car when she left. They exchanged numbers. It seemed to anyone watching like an ordinary beginning. But Maxwell Anderson had a history that the surface didn't show. His criminal record included operating a vehicle while intoxicated in disorderly conduct. More significantly, in 2019, a bystander filmed him beating a man who had tried to intervene while Maxwell was having an argument with a girlfriend. He was arrested for battery and later pleaded guilty to a lesser charge. The pattern behind that incident was specific. He didn't direct his anger at a stranger who provoked him. He directed it at someone who tried to protect someone else from him. That distinction matters when you're trying to understand what happened later. On the evening of April 1st, 2024, Sade and Maxwell met at a restaurant called the Twisted Fisherman. Security camera footage captured them together at the bar. The footage revealed something subtle but notable. Maxwell spoke mostly to the bartender. He didn't turn towards Sade much. For a first date, the interaction between them was limited in a way that stood out to the detective who reviewed it. From there, the two of them moved to a nearby bar called Duke's on Water. The camera footage there showed a slightly different picture. They played beer pong with another couple, and Sade was smiling. That stretch of the evening, according to the footage, was the only time she appeared to genuinely enjoy herself. They left Dukes together around 9 in the evening. Sade was walking steadily, no sign of impairment. There was minimal physical contact between them throughout the night, one brief moment at the very end of their walk to the parking lot. Sitio Live 360 app, a location tracking application that stores historical GPS data rather than just current location, would become one of the most important tools in reconstructing everything that followed. It showed that the two of them arrived at Maxwell Anderson's house around 9:30 that night. 3 hours later, at approximately 12:30 in the morning, Sade's phone left Maxwell's house. Her car began moving in the direction of her apartment, but it never arrived. Instead of turning into her building, the car drove past it. Surveillance cameras across Milwaukee captured Sade's car moving through the city for hours after that, windows fogged, traveling without any clear destination, covering miles of ground in what appeared to be a completely directionless pattern. Anyone who has ever driven somewhere familiar in the dark knows the feeling of that route by heart. Sade's car was not moving like someone who knew where they were going. It was moving like someone else was behind the wheel. At 2:53 in the morning, Sides Life 360A placed her phone at Warnimont Park. At 4:35 in the morning, the battery died. That was the last signal her phone ever sent. The morning of April 2nd, 2024, Sade's friends hadn't heard from her. A welfare check was requested. When a patrol officer arrived at Saidi's apartment and found no answer, alarm bells, as she would later describe it, were already going off. A missing young woman. A body part discovered along the lake shore at the very park where Sade's phone had last been tracked. Two pieces of information that didn't fit together in any innocent way. When Sade's 16-year-old sister Adriana was brought to her mother's house and asked to pull up the Life 360 data, she saw the location herself. She watched the detective's face change when he understood what the coordinates meant. She already knew, in the way people know things they're not ready to say out loud, that something had been done to her sister. Sade's burned car was found behind an abandoned building 3 miles from her apartment. The fire investigator noted that the passenger side smelled heavily of a petroleum-based accelerant, pointing clearly to arson rather than accident. The fire had been thorough enough to destroy most of the interior and eliminate fingerprints and DNA evidence. But not everything was gone. Tucked underneath the driver's seat was Sade's purse, still intact. That single detail removed robbery as a possible motive in one moment. And in the trunk, investigators found Sade's clothing. The pants and underwear had been removed together and turned inside out, the way clothes come off when someone else is taking them off. The jacket and shoes were there too. These were the clothes Sade had been wearing on her date. One more detail from the car would prove significant. The driver's seat was positioned far too far back for Sade to have been driving. Sade was not a tall woman. The seat was set for someone considerably larger. An experiment with an identical vehicle confirmed that in that seat position, a person of Sade's height could not reach the pedals without perching at the very edge of the seat in a way that made normal driving impossible. The last person to drive Sade Robinson's car had to be at least 6 feet tall and tested. Maxwell Anderson was 6 feet 1 inch tall. While DNA testing was still underway to formally confirm the identity of the remains found at Warnimont Park, the investigation began focusing on Maxwell Anderson. More body parts were discovered across Milwaukee County in the days that followed, each believed to belong to the same victim. Community members, family friends, people who had never met Sade but felt the weight of what was happening went out to search areas that had already been cleared. 2 women named Keek and Arlinda found a blanket belonging to Sade and then a human bone near train tracks. Both were in locations that had already been searched. On April 4th, a search warrant was executed on Maxwell Anderson's home. Investigators had hoped to find a crime scene. So, what they found instead was 51 knives in the kitchen alone, but no blood, no obvious signs of a struggle, and no evidence of a cleanup. The dismemberment had not happened in that house. Whatever Maxwell Anderson had done, and wherever he had done it, he had not done it there. What broke the investigation open in a way no piece of physical evidence had managed came from a woman named Chloe Wright. Chloe had dated Maxwell for more than a year before they broke up. She described him as verbally abusive, someone who made cutting remarks about her appearance and her body. Secretive, a person who kept things close and didn't like questions. But she also remembered something specific that he had shared with her, something he had been protective enough about that he gave her only step-by-step directions when he took her there, rather than telling her the name. He called it his secret beach. He had made clear that the location was for him alone, that he didn't want her to be able to bring other people there if they ever broke up. But Chloe remembered the directions. She led investigators straight to Warnimont Park. The knowledge that Maxwell Anderson had a name for that beach, that he considered it his, that it was somewhere private and meaningful to him, placed him in a relationship with that location that no other evidence had established. It was not a place he had wandered into randomly that night. It was a place he had chosen in advance. His place? Security camera footage from a building near where Sade's car was set on fire showed a man walking away from the burning vehicle. He boarded a city bus. The camera on the bus captured his face with clarity. It was Maxwell Anderson. He was carrying a large backpack. The gray jacket he was wearing that night was later found in a neighbor's garbage can 2 houses away from his home. When tested, Sade Robinson's DNA was found inside the hood and on the zipper pull. On April 12, 2024, the remains found along Lake Michigan were preliminarily identified as belonging to Sade Robinson. That same day, Maxwell Anderson was charged with first-degree intentional homicide, mutilation of a corpse, and arson. He pleaded not guilty to all 3 charges. The trial began in May 2025. The prosecution built its case around a timeline, a trail of digital and physical evidence, and the testimony of people who had known Maxwell Anderson before any of this happened. The defense acknowledged the timeline without disputing it, acknowledging that Maxwell and Sade had spent the evening together and returned to his house, while arguing that none of that proved he had killed her. The absence of a known cause of death, the absence of the murder weapon, and the absence of some of Sade's remains were presented as serious gaps in the state's case. And they were gaps. That much was honest. A circumstantial case is still a case built on inference rather than certainty. And any reasonable person listening to the defense could identify the places where the evidence didn't fully close. The car footage was grainy. The figure on the beach was unclear. The jacket with Sade's DNA could be explained, technically, by the fact that she had been inside his home. The defense was right that none of it was a perfect line from Maxwell Anderson to Sade Robinson's death. The question was whether the sum of it all pointed anywhere else. It is worth sitting with that question because it is the kind of question that divides people who follow cases like this one. Some people are uncomfortable with conviction in the absence of a body that tells a clear story. Others look at the totality of what was laid out and see only one shape in all of it. The jury looked at both positions and made a decision. What moved them, in the end, was not the car or the beach or the jacket. It was photographs found on Maxwell Anderson's phone that he had taken and then deleted. They showed Sade at his home, face down, unresponsive, being handled by a man whose hand was visible in the frame. Whether she was alive or dead in those photographs, no one could say with certainty. What the photographs made visible beyond any argument was how Maxwell Anderson regarded another human being in a moment when he believed no one was watching. The jury returned a verdict of guilty on all counts. First-degree intentional homicide, mutilation of a corpse, arson. The deliberation lasted less than an hour after an overnight break. At sentencing, Sade's family stood before the court and spoke. Adriana, 17 by then, described what it felt like to move through the world after losing her sister to a man Sade had only just met. The fear that now attached itself to every new person. The way something as ordinary as meeting someone had been permanently reframed by what happened to Sade. Sheena, Sade's mother, wore pink on her eyelids and her daughter's favorite color and addressed the man who killed her directly. She asked for one thing. She asked him to tell the court where her daughter's head was, because Sade's head has never been found. The Crown, Sheena, called it. She asked for it back. Maxwell Anderson stood and said that from the bottom of his heart, his condolences went out to Sade's family. And then he said he did not commit these crimes. He said he hoped further investigation would prove his innocence. He offered the theory that Sade had been abducted by an unknown person from his backyard or his alley after leaving his home. He said he believed he had been set up. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. After the sentencing, a detail emerged that the investigation had uncovered, but that only fully registered in its context afterward. Roughly 5 hours before Maxwell Anderson met Sade Robinson for the first time, he had sent a message to his former girlfriend, Chloe Wright. The message said that ignore time was over. 5 hours after that, Sade walked into the bar where he worked, looking for a job. Sade Robinson graduated, not in the way she had planned. Her sister Adriana walked across the stage at what should have been Sade's graduation ceremony in May 2024, wearing a pink cap and gown, and accepted Sade's associate's degree on her behalf. Sheena has since launched a program to support crime victims and partnered with a Wisconsin state representative to create a task force examining the disproportionately high rates of violence against Black women and girls. A mural of Sade was painted beneath the pizza shuttle where she once greeted her manager the same way every single day. A memorial bench was placed at Warnimont Park. Sade's family is still waiting for the lake to give back what it holds. The detective who worked this case from the first moment she stood on that bluff says she still searches. She has gone back dozens of times. Not because the case is open, because the family asked for something, and that something has not yet been returned. What Sade Robinson was building at 19 years old was the kind of life that takes courage and consistency and a willingness to keep going even when things are hard. 2 jobs, full-time school, an apartment, a car, a plan that reached past graduation and into the Air Force and beyond. She greeted the same person the same way every day and meant it every time. She loved her sister with a hesitation at the door that Adriana will carry for the rest of her life. She met someone new the way people do, the way all of us have at some point, with a phone number exchanged and a first date arranged and nothing yet to suggest the evening become anything other than a story to tell later. And that ordinary beginning is the part of this story that stays with you long after everything else has settled, not the horror of what was found, not the evidence or the verdict or the sentence, but the fact that it started the same way 1,000 ordinary evenings start. And that the difference between those evenings and this one was a man who regarded another person as something to be disposed of in a park he called his secret beach.